All right, Tucker. I'm gonna go ahead and get it started. I usually wait a few minutes, man. People filter in and all that stuff, but I know you only got 10 minutes on you, man. So, what's going on, guys? Very, very exciting day in the markets, right? Nobody really cared about Jackson Hole. Powell pretty much just said money printers turning on. I don't care what you guys think. We're gonna nuke the DXY. We're gonna cut rates, and we're gonna send your alts, right? So, we're seeing some altcoins doing very, very, very well, right? We're seeing things on Solana, right? Like Popcat going absolutely berserk, Retardio going absolutely berserk, Andy and Wolf on ETH, right? 0x68, 0x67 starting to catch up here relative to some Sol Beta. And look, right? Anytime BTC has gotten to the macro range lows over the last 6 months, within a couple of weeks, we're back at range highs. And there is a massive, massive CME gap that we've been discussing here on all of our shows over the last couple of weeks at 3,200, right? So I know there's some little concerns about the ETH Foundation sending like 90 mil to Kraken or whatever, and historically that tends to lead to a little cool off, right? Even if it's for only a few days, right? We've got the Fed cut on September 18th, but we also have CZ coming out of jail in like 10 days, right? And but I'll tell you this, guys, man, I'll tell you this, right? Like the narrative that has been spun around here on these shows over the last like week or two, right? About utility coins starting to catch a bid, right? And you take a look at today's price action. I think the proof is in the pudding, right? You're seeing things like Say and Sui doing quite well. Things like Ionet, FET, right? All up like 15, 20+%. And I'll say this, man. I think in Q4, a lot of people are going to be very shocked at some of the moves to the upside, but a lot of these utility coins are going to catch, right? And I just came off of our community Discord call that we usually host twice a day, uh, and Tucker, he said something funny. He said something along the lines of "Screw your utility coins. They're not going anywhere." But we can talk a little bit about that, man. But I'm gonna pass the mic, truthfully, over to Tucker now. Um, so I know he's probably pissed off because I'm holding him back from having a cigar with some good old fashioned Kansas barbecue. So, Tucker, the eighth wonder of the world, the 7 foot tall, 500-pound behemoth from parts unknown. What's going on, brother? How are you feeling, man? What are we even talking about? Boys, we're pumping. It was written in the stars, brother. At the end of the day, it was written in the stars of Grimace. So I'm going to pass it on over to you. Big Country Tuck, man. What's going on, bro?
Hey, what
Have
an
you on?
intro, Lobby. What an intro.
Hey, bro, dude. Max was giving you a
Yeah, he
glazed a
was.
glazed intro, dude. I've never done that before, and I'm probably like the number one Haggard fan on this app since you had 150 followers. When you had 150 followers, we coined the term Haggard's Army, but few remember Haggard's Army during
Do you
the
remember? Yes. Do you remember?
during the spring lows of last year. But yeah, Tucker, man, give us a rundown on what you're seeing, man, and how you're feeling about us going into the month of September. I know. You're one of the few individuals on here that have said, look, the Fed has obviously started to telegraph like, a soft landing. This is going to be the most telegraphed rate cut that we've had in history. Markets are more forward looking more than they ever have. And unironically, this time may potentially be different on more of a broader scale for all markets, man. So I'll pass the mic over to you without further ado, man.
Yeah, yeah, no, thanks, Bobby. I mean, what a day, guys. What a day, right? I mean, I didn't even listen to Pal earlier. I thought about it, but we were doing our morning Discord call with our community, talking about markets and whatnot, but got the gist of it. I mean, Powell, I don't think he took a victory lap, but I mean, the guy, honestly, like, he's done a pretty fucking good job. I'm not gonna lie. Like, the guy's done a decent job. He was handed a pretty rough situation, and inflation is down, GDP's fine, unemployment is, depends on what data you look at, right? But holding conservatively, we'll say. Equities at all-time highs, Dixie nuking, you got global liquidity coiling up, HYG breaking out, you got IWM breaking out. Like, what other conditions are we looking for our shit coins and crypto to rip? Because there aren't any better. Okay, there are not any better. Actually, you know what? There could be one better, and that's easier monetary conditions. Oh wait, guys, they're cutting next month. Oh wait, and now I know everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, cuts are bearish." Didn't you know? Cuts are bearish. Look at the yield curve. I'm aware, okay? I am very well aware of what overlaying the SPX and the Fed funds rate shows. I'm very well aware, okay? Um, I would argue, however, that I'm not going to say the words this time is not the same, but I mean, every other and really okay, what people say when they're looking at that chart, right? When you overlay Fed cuts with the S&P, and you can't really do it with crypto, but with the S&P, right, is they're saying, okay, in 2001 and in 2008 this happened, right? Clearly, let's just take '08 for example. Clearly, there were things going on, aka subprime mortgage crises that were under the surface that the Fed was forced to cut quickly, right? '01, you had the tech bubble pop, right? There were other things happening, right? It wasn't the cuts. This is what I've been trying to tell people, that cuts are not innately bearish themselves. A cut in a vacuum is bullish. Easier monetary conditions, cheaper cost of capital is bullish, okay? It's just the fact that the last two times they did it because there was a lot of shit blowing up in the background, right? That is not the case today, right? And I know I've seen the doomers, I understand, right? The, borrowing against shares of Nvidia and the yen carry trade. I know, okay? I understand. All right, guys, I know. But the market doesn't seem to care, okay? The market doesn't seem to care, and that's really the only barometer that you should be measuring any of this against. That's the only thing that should care is the market. So why should I care, right? Um, Everything I just said, right? Dixie nuking, M2 going up, fucking Fed balance sheet going up, rates about to get cut. There's no better mix of conditions that you get to get your coins to go up. Okay. That's where we're at. And this is what I've been saying for like 9 months, no, like 10 or 11 months at this point, is being just giga long spot for the next 12 months, most likely, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, whatever, is going to outperform every leverage monkey. Okay, everyone trying to scalp on the 10-minute chart is going to get wiped, and spot is going to outperform. It's just how it goes. Okay, I've been around. I understand how it works. Okay, that's how it goes. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's not much more to it, right? It's just like, why would I risk, being wrong on a 5-minute time frame and losing coins permanently rather than just enduring drawdown? Take your drawdown like a
It's
man,
it's
you
all
know.
in or all out, dude. There is no in
There
between.
is no in between.
As a
Wobby, no,
crypto
I know
market,
you said this. I know you said this. You were like, yeah, I've got some stables on the sideline, whatever. And I sent
hey,
the meme of Brad Pitt in that movie. And what did it say? It said, oh, I won't be fully deployed ever because it's too risky. And then it's Brad Pitt putting on his helmet. And he said, and that's why no one will
oh
remember your
god.
name.
All right, look, man. Look, look. All right,
It is what it is.
it seems we're back in that market time period where I shouldn't fade Haggard, the Haggard super cycle, man. But
It's
man,
restarted.
But
but
it's going to 44K because Cole has said so.
but but
Yes.
but look, man. Sorry for the interruption, man. But I do have to say one thing, guys. I do have to say one thing, and I forgot to say this during my opening rant slash intro monologue, whatever you want to call it, guys. You can go ahead and smash up and like the Spaces link. If you guys can retweet the Spaces link, just open up the Spaces tab. You'll see a little link that says x.com/i/spaces. Retweet the room, guys. Retweet the room. I'm here with Mr. Spread, Tucker, Chill. I see Cool in the audience. We're also going to have Dave on, who was here a couple of days ago. And I think we're also going to have Louis, who is right now wrapping up our afternoon community Discord call, which, man, I tell you what, man, few can make a man feel better than some green pumps. And, I'll say this before I pass it on over to Big Harry, because I know he has to go in a few moments, but I was on a call with Max a couple of days ago, and I'm like, man, Max, I feel like I'm losing my momentum in these markets. I kind of going through stuff IRL, and he's like, look, Wabi, you know as well as I do that if BTC were to go to 80K next week, you would feel a hell of a lot better. And I tell you what, that is the absolute truth. And I mean, Tucker can tell you, man. Tucker can tell you. In Q4 of last year, a few things happened, and then Tia starts to go absolutely crazy. And I'm like, man, there is nothing better than waking up and seeing this token just hit all-time high after all-time high. So, literally, like, most of your problems can be solved through a pump. Am I wrong or right about that, Hagrid? Go ahead and
No, you're damn right, bro. You're
Hagrid,
damn right.
bro. Hagrid pill us, man.
Look, I know. I remember last year when you hit Neon and Tia. I was like, "Oh my god, he's just fucking on fire, bro." You were absolutely killing it. Q4, Q1. I mean, but no, on the utility coin thing, because I remember you brought that up. No, it's not that they're not going to go up, right? Like I'm sure fucking like Sui and Say are chatting today. Let me look. Yeah, like they're up a good bit today, right? But my thing is, I just think the memes are going to continue outperforming at least for the foreseeable future, and personally, I'm fine being late to that rotation, right? Because that is a rotation that needs to happen, right? It needs to come. It will happen. The rotation from memes to utility will be a thing, right? Because like I don't know if I want to say in order to have a bull market, but like in order to get to where I think we probably are going to go, we need people to. I remember in 2020 and 2021, we need people to
We need to see Tao at
believe.
1,000, bro. We need to see Tao at 1,000.
Yeah, we need to see people look at Ondo and Say and Sui and be like, you know what, these things are going to change the world. This is going to be the future of finance. That narrative has to be a thing, right? Like it has to be. Like, I don't think memes are going to stop going up, but at some point you're going to get a rotation probably into utility. And here's my thing: I don't think front running that is plus EV. I think it is very, very minus EV. There is no reason to front run that. I think you ride memes until that rotation is clearly happening and you come in 20% late. Who cares, right? I just think you are going to get outperformed if you try to front run that too early, because people have been trying to front run that since March and it has not worked out for them. So that's what I'm saying. I'm still bulled up. Meme train, Wolf, Andy, Brett, Pepe. Louis called out base Pepe at 300K. That's a fucking 30x at this point now. I'm in from like 2 mil. Let's ride. That's where we're at. But yeah, I gotta run, boys. So I'll catch you later.
Hey, man, it was great having you, bro. You guys can catch Hagrid Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays on Market Check. That's our YouTube show. Yeah, today's Market Check was absolutely phenomenal, man. And yeah, that was some great analysis, man, from Hagrid, right? Like, you kind of need those utility narratives to kind of start back up. And yeah, I see Doc here in the audience, man. I'll go ahead and send him an invite. And unironically, as Hagrid said, you actually do need to see, things like Ondo go to like $5, Tau at 1,000, and really get people hyped up on like, this is life changing tech and all that stuff. And then we'll probably see memes take that massive move up. And I'll say this, man, as a Pepe enjoyer, right? Like, it's pretty telling when you see, something like a FET that's not really that far off from Pepe's, market cap outperform Pepe since those lows. You're even starting to see things like Phantom doing quite well. And touching upon Phantom, right? I know Mr. Spread has been quite bullish on Phantom since like the beginning of the year, and that was a phenomenal trade. And I'll say this, man: rebrands are often very, very bullish. Aave is rebranding, Maker is rebranding, and those have been doing, quite exceptional since these local lows that we hit a few weeks ago. And last cycle, we did have tokens from the cycle previously in 2017 that actually went on to make higher highs. So maybe Phantom is one of them, right? Maybe Aave is one of them, right? History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And sometimes you do have tokens from last cycle that eventually do make a higher high, right? But you know, uh, pretty good panel. I also see Will up here, but I'll pass it on over to Mr. Spread. I understand that he's in Romania, and it's getting quite late there. And I know Mr. Spread likes to enjoy his weekends, man. So, Spread, what's going on, brother? You've been posting some pretty great analysis. You guys go ahead and check them out. Spread, how are you feeling about today's price action, man? And sort of like the opening statements that were discussed here, man.
Thanks for the invite again, Wabi. Who does not love green, man? I think people who love red, they're just communists. I'm sorry, but is the truth, right? You don't. When the market was dropping, when it was the bear market, I was not enjoying it. I was just trading it, but I couldn't have waited for this kind of times. But how many times should we say the same things? I see Matt here, and it was yesterday or a few days ago when we were talking about what was happening, that people most likely are going to get chopped up here and most likely we're going to go higher. I mean, what argument should I bring more? Like, even IWM is rallying right now. Global liquidity, like Hagrid said. And I remember Chill really liked my analysis a few nights ago when I was saying about the DXY, right? With the weight which euro has in the DXY basket, and that the euro is reaping because of the interest rate differentials, and that the markets are looking forward. So when you have all this mixture, all this concoction of bullish elements, you just need a spark. And I think Papa Powell today just pulled the trigger. So he's been the whitey dovey dove. And I mean, I really want, because I like corner cases and I like to be that, devil's attorney, but I really want some really smart and knowledgeable comments as to why someone should be bearish right now. Sorry. I mean, I really want to see that, because I might be a little bit more bullish or too bullish, and I like people who bring some fire to some nice debates. I really enjoy nice debates, but as of like right now, I really don't see the corner case short to medium term. So for the next 3 to 6 months, I don't see the corner case, but realistic, not a black swan that can come out of nowhere. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like something that we can discuss about, some facts, some data. And Hagrid, before he left, he said regarding the interest rates and when the Federal Reserve is cutting. I think I repeated this before, but I don't think it's promoted enough, because there is a psyop chart that goes around Twitter. When Federal Reserve cuts, that's bearish for risk assets. That cannot be anything further from the truth. Ryan Dietrich, which I quoted again today from Carson Research, published a very, very nice analysis dating back in 1980 with 3 scenarios when Federal Reserve cuts. If Federal Reserve cuts because of a recession, that's very bearish, short to medium term. If Federal Reserve cuts because of a panic, like we had great financial crisis of COVID, we have a V-shaped recovery. So that's bearish 1 to 3 months. If we have a cut because of a normalization, like we're going right now, yeah, we might have a dip of, I don't know, 1 to 2%. But even 2-3 months or 12 months after, S&P 500 is most of the times 10-15% higher. And I think this is the case. And Hagrid was saying another thing. He was saying, I don't know what other things we need to go even higher. I can tell you what other things we need to go higher besides all the other things that he mentioned and I mentioned. People being fucking sidelined or being short because they have bear market PTSD, because they were not able to flip in the last 6 to 9 months, because they just got another hit on their PTSD with the VIX blowing up, right? And with what we had with the carry trade unwinding. So this is what is going to push the prices higher. People are just going to chase higher. And this is like, price is the best narrative changer. When prices go higher, people are going to come back to the markets, and that's it. And all the overhang supply that we had until now, like, just imagine, man, we have BlockFi, Mt. Gox, Germany, United States. We had so many Genesis, we had Grayscale, we had so many entities who are just selling, and we absorbed this, and now we're like what, 63 and a half. like almost 64K. And I'm telling you, I'm going to repost tomorrow that chart from last autumn when we had the same panel almost, you, me, Matt, Naka, and we dropped in that crazy night in August. We ranged for about 60 days, and after that we broke out above 28.5, 30, and 32. Well, if you look back on the charts, you will see that 28.5 it was the 60K, 30,000 is the 62K right now. So above 62K, I think 65 and 70K comes really, really fast. I don't know, man. Other than that, I really want to see some very knowledgeable bearish angles so we can really debate them and bring them up front.
And yeah, I can't really bring up a super bearish case just given the context of what was going on when some of these prices were hit, right? In April when we hit 56K, there was like some World War III flood, and then a couple of months later in July it was Germany, the whole Germany unwinds, and a couple of weeks later after we hit 70K, I think everybody is going to remember that for the rest of their lives, right? We had that small Japan scare. So, what would take us to lower lows? I don't know, dude. Like, you can't really. We can throw out a bunch of different scenarios, but, the fact of the matter is, anytime BTC hits range highs or range lows and altcoins just get decimated in between with the VR performers, the narrative tends to be quite crazy, right? But, we are seeing some signs of life, right? We are seeing some signs of life. And for some of these assets to potentially, do the same things that Injective and Solana and Caspa did going into Q4, right? And we're seeing some very, very, very strong recoveries across the board. And I'm going to pass it on over to Will. He had his hand up, and then I'm going to do this rotation. I do like to start from the bottom up, right? I don't usually go like from the right all the way down. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pass it over to Will, Doc, and then Chill, and then Matt, right? I know Will and Doc are quite happy with this price action, given the fact that they are enjoyers of being on centralized exchanges and trading some of those assets. And you can call it VC season, utility season, you can call it whatever season you want. But the fact of the matter is, when you have more narratives outside of memes starting to catch a bid, and not only like you know price, but also just overall social awareness, right? Like, I'm sure you guys are starting to see, Fett on your timeline again, Suey and Say on your timeline again, and we were kind of discussing some of these same themes, right? A couple of months back when Doc was up here, Will was up here with Mercury, and like we were discussing how, look, AI is going crazy, but memes have kind of taken a step back, right? Maybe it's time to pay attention to memes, and maybe utility will start to rally 6 months after. And that space, I remember vividly, it was hosted. I think it was hosted in like early February, mid February, when WorldCoin and Fed and all that stuff were starting to go crazy. And here we are 6 months later, and we're starting to see some of those same sectors starting to rally. So history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. I'm just glad that. Some volume is being driven back into these markets before some of these bigger desks come back after Labor Day, right? Historically speaking, guys, after Labor Day, some of these bigger market makers start to add more volume to their book on exchanges, and we do start to see, the next chapter in outperformance for altcoins against Bitcoin, to be basically presented to you guys. So Will, what's going on, man? I'm sure you're very happy with Sui today, man. So, what's going on, brother? Great to have you on the show, man. I know you're fixing your car and all that stuff, so I'm sure it's going to be a busy weekend ahead for you, man. But nonetheless, I'm glad that you're here on the show, man. What's up, brother?
Yeah, it's a interesting week. It's not that I can't go get it fixed somewhere. I just enjoyed fixing my own car. But I will say this: the market's been pretty interesting. We got the drop that I was looking for, kind of back into that mid range. Bounced off of that low, started creating higher lows, higher low structure, and now we're kind of breaking out of this grind back up into resistance, and we're kind of above that at this point. I still think like there's a little bit more to go. I think flipping 65 can make it where you there's practically impossible to be bearish at that point, but I think you still got to get up there. That could still be used as a resistance area, but I wouldn't really expect it to be. Overall, though, this is something I've been preaching on here on the timeline. Is like the shift from the whole meme coin, meme coin market, meme coin, meme coin market to utility is it was going to be a thing. It was bound to be a thing, and people needed to kind of switch up a bit here. I know there's a lot of people still playing memes, but I just think that your upside is very limited. I think even Bitcoin will probably see more upside than some of these memes, which is pretty sad to say for if you're in here just if you're trying to do a performance portfolio and you're trying to just beat Bitcoin on an average. I would say that that's not a lot. That's not saying a lot for these memes. So he's doing absolutely amazing. I think that people that kind of slept on that one, they are still sleeping on it. I think the network's great. It's very similar to Solana. Can provide the same kind of we'll say throughput and so on and so forth performance as Solana, and it's from a team from Meta, and I think that not enough people look at all the beneficial factors. Another one too that I found out just recently was ICP and XRP are actually on CME Group. um Surprising to me. So I did pick up some ICP too due to that specifically. XRP, we'll see what the upside potential there is, but again, I'm looking at RR, basically, and I'm like, okay, ICP is probably the better RR. If you're looking at these two being on CME Group, I'll go with the better RR play here. Not saying that XRP won't see numbers, but overall, I think there's potential for another dip. Like I'm gonna be 100% real. There's definitely potential, but I don't think we'll be revisiting the lows we already saw, right? And I think that not enough people think about that. I haven't really sold into anything as far as stables. Like I've rotated some capital from memes to fundamentals, like your SUIs and your other L1s and so on and so forth. But I haven't rotated any capital to stable coins. I don't see the point in that. Going into a bull cycle like what I think we're going to see in 2025, we're basically just gearing up to go into that. If we see a big dip, oh well, I'll take a big hit for the temporary time being. I'm not worried about that. I'm looking at the bigger picture here, and I'm positioned for the bigger picture versus the potential for a black swan, which I think is just dumb for people to even attempt to try and catch a black swan. It's a black swan for a reason. Nobody sees it coming. You could try and say you did, but nobody does.
Will, that was an absolute cook fest, man. I'm going to pass it on over to Doc. Doc, great to have you on the show, man. How's your weekend looking like? And what are you thinking of this price action, man? Some of the names that we've been discussing here on this show over the last couple of months that have just been, kind of just grinding on the floor are starting to show some signs of life, man. And even some new tickers, right? Like Ionet showing some life. And this is a new AI token, and I kind of think that the market has forgotten about it, right? But, as we've been discussing on the show, right, price ultimately leads the narrative. And, if we look at, what's the leader typically when AI starts to run, we look at FET and Tau, and those have been doing quite well over the last couple of weeks, man. So, how are you doing, man?
Pretty good. Hope you're well as well, Wabi. Yeah, man. The cool thing about alts is I think the momentum we saw it over the last few weeks with the August nuke, right? Some alts were already down so bad. Like you could look at like a whiff or something like that. We're already so down so bad in July that they basically just SFP'd those lows. I know they traded lower for maybe a day or two. But basically maintain that same valuation that they had a month prior, right? And that goes to show that momentum is kind of waning to the downside, that there are buyers coming in and scooping up those prices right now. Not everyone here has to be a hero and buy those prices, but you can take notice of when momentum is waning and when these accumulation ranges start forming, right? So I guess the last piece of the puzzle would be reclaiming high time frame trends, right? The trends that all broke down in April and March and started the big sell-off over summer, right? That those kind of accumulation range started forming when momentum the downside starts waning. Now you need to reclaim those same high time frame EMAs, which in my system is going to be on the weekly is going to be the daily 100 and the daily 200 EMA. We've been talking about those all summer. And I think once you do reclaim those, you will start to get your next sort of mega risk on rally, right? You can look at, others or Total 3, or look at one of the strong alts like Pepe or WIF or anything like that, historically strong alts from this cycle. and point towards those. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had in this market. And we're seeing the first signs of kind of waning momentum to the downside. You're seeing that spark off the lows. And I didn't even mention Bitcoin, but Bitcoin trading back inside of its 5-month composite. I've been tweeting about this over the last week. That, the major resistance was the daily trend, the weekly trend, confluent with that 5-month composite value area low. So all those kind of overlapping resistances were in our way over the last, 8 to 10 days. Bitcoin is definitively breaking above all 3 of those right now. It's looking like a really strong range reclaim. It's giving a lot of life to alts. And as far as like Jackson Hole goes, like this is a big scary event for people. I don't know or care too much about macro. Like that's just not my bag. I don't really care for it. But I know a lot of people do, and they're waiting for this day so that, big scary event is kind of out of the way, which is kind of nice to see the reaction that markets are giving post Jackson Hole.
Doc, so let me ask you this, man. Now that the summer is coming to an end, how would you rate the price action that's been going on over the last couple of weeks compared to last summer? Did you have more fun? Was it more miserable? Was it kind of the same thing?
This summer is a million times better. I don't think anyone wanted to go back and trade 4 tickers on Ethereum. We meme about it, but it was just like RLB, Unibot. There was a couple of other strong ones. Like I traded the shit out of CAS, but not a lot of people want to trade on like, third tier exchanges like MEXC at the time. CAS was only listed on perps at MEXC and stuff like that. But there were some standouts last summer. Solana was super fun to trade in that range. Tons of volatility between like $16 and like $25 all summer. But other than that, this summer's been extremely more volatile. Like Bitcoin basically flatlined last summer at like 28-30K for six weeks or something like that. And then flatlined again at like 24K, right? There was really no volatility in the centralized exchange coins. All we really had was like, if you're a flow trader, you were doing really well trading the cartel coins, the DWF coins and stuff like that. But this summer provided, I would say, infinitely more opportunity versus last summer. So I had much more fun this summer.
Doc, so moving forward over the next couple of weeks, man, what are some things that you would want to see for constructive price action for the bulls? What are some of like the key levels that you want to see breached, man, in order for us to break this range, right? And just to add some context, man, for the audience here, right? Ever since we topped out in March, within 4 weeks, you have a touch of the top end of the range and the bottom end of the range, right? March, we hit 74K. Month later, 56. Month later, 71. Month later, 53.
Yeah, it's been wild.
Month later, 70. So, it's quite big to think that, all right, like crypto is becoming an institutional asset. We're getting all these ETFs, but the price action kind of has been telling us differently, right? Like the more things change, the more they stay the same, man. So, I guess like more broadly speaking, how are you really viewing price action to move forward over the next couple of weeks? I understand that I think you labeled this back in April, right? After we started bouncing off of 56, and I think like ENA got released or something like that, and you were like, what if we repeat the same price action as we did in 2023, and we're about to enter the mental asylum, and the best thing to unironically do is to delete CT and to delete your exchange apps and log back on at the start of October.
Yeah, it's funny that I kind of joked about 2 things, right? We joked about the parallels of 2023, how the year so far had been playing out kind of similar. And it wasn't like hey, big prediction that we are going to range all summer. It was just a thesis, right? That thesis played out correctly, but it wasn't like me trying to come out here and be like, look, I'm right. This is how it's going to play out and et cetera. That's not what I'm trying to do or what I tried to do back then. But I just kind of proposed the idea that summer could be an area where we just kind of stay range bound. This is just basically because every summer that I've ever been in crypto has not been that great for crypto. Like every summer when the influencers go to Dubai and do their boxing thing, that usually ends up being a very strong local top on majors. And the Bitcoin conference ends up being closer to a summer bottom, right? The Bitcoin conference and stuff like that is usually like in August. So that chunk in that period of time is usually not that great for centralized exchange coins. Usually you get a lot of activity on chain, but like the centralized exchange coins don't really mark up that much. But coming to your main question, like what do I see coming up now? I think you're just looking at constructive bullish price action on alts. They've sold off they're going to form accumulation ranges. They're probably going to get bonked by some high time frame downtrending EMAs, right? That'll be their range high. They may revisit these lows or set a constructive higher low. But nonetheless, I think, any sell-offs from here are opportunities to stack. Even if you're flat, if you're stabled up, I still think you have a couple weeks to maybe 6 weeks to probably really get locked in, because we always meme Uptober, but somehow or another Uptober always holds true in these markets. So I still think you have a little bit of time, and if we're gonna continue deja vuing last year, which it's been hilarious. Like, I can draw so many parallels to last summer. Like, a fun one is, Suzu went to jail last summer. last summer, 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 summer, last 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 summer, summer, last 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 summer, summer, last 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 last summer, 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 last last summer, 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 summer, last 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 summer,